let's get on with the panel. So you do, obviously you started with a lot of content creation before amassing your incredible fan base. How important is content creation to, you know, your music and to your art?
Yeah, I think especially in this day and age, like content is key, like it's king. And with how fast everything moves as well, like you kind of got to be on top of on the ball with content now. But for me, like the biggest growth I saw for myself in my career was when I was, you know, on top of that content. I was releasing 2 songs a week, like, and it just naturally happened, you know, like you put good art in front of people, they're eventually going to see it, and it's eventually going to snowball. I feel like if the quality's there, like, yeah, the content is just going to take it all the way for you. So it's so important, like so important.
And has that helped you with collaborating with people all over the world?
Yeah, it actually has, like with Jonas as well. He reached out to me because he was a fan of seeing my covers on YouTube. And then I've met some really good people that I've gone on tours with through doing content with them, like in the States, Alex Iono or Connor Maynard in London. So yeah, it's really opened doors for me to be able to collaborate with a lot of people and just have these amazing moments. So yeah, again, that's why it's key.
And after you've had these collaborations, do you see that, you know, those artists see opportunity in Australia as well?
Oh yeah, I think they definitely see opportunity in Australia, and everyone wants to come down and tour or, you know, build those relationships in Australia. The only thing is it's so far away from everyone, so they're always like, they're a little bit hesitant because they want to make sure that it's going to be worth their time, and like they're going to be able to pull the crowds that they want to, which normally they do. It's just such a far away for them. But yeah, I think it's really opened doors for a lot of people that I've worked with to be able to come down to Australia and enjoy themselves and, you know, enjoy making amazing music and touring it. So yeah.
Dom, what strategies do you see Australians employing to export their music overseas? And two-parter, have you seen any of these strategies being mirrored by artists looking to expand into Australia?
Look, I think there's kind of a tried and tested way of exporting that Australian artists have used. And for Sounds Australia, for us as the Music Export Office, we were set up to produce showcases and networking events at showcase conferences. That's essentially why we exist, and the remit has grown a little bit since then, but at our core, that is what we do. And Australian artists have used that path for quite a long time to break into places like, particularly the US, UK, and Europe, because the showcase conference model is really strong there. I think how William is doing it is kind of a best in class for the next generation of artists in the way that they are exporting, in using digital platforms in a way that I'm not sure the old guard, to call them the old guard, are all that great at. Because traditionally in Australia, again, there were very kind of well-trodden paths in the way that you would have a career. In Australia, radio was, and still is to an extent, but was really the driver of music discovery for the country. Now that is in a large part from my former employer, Triple J, and artists would try and get playlisted on that radio station, which is a national radio station. Through that allowed them to tour nationally. From there, they would get onto these big festivals, and then it would kind of a step up. And that was you could see that path. And it was a great path for Australian artists and international artists as well. It probably did limit them a lot of artists in their thinking. It was like, well, if I don't get the festival player, if I don't get the radio ad, then I don't have any other ideas. Now that music consumption and music fandom is so fractured across so many different platforms, your audience is so dispersed, artists like William are coming up in an environment and are kind of native to that and know how to reach an audience. So I think the way in which Australian artists export is now much more varied. Do I see it in the reverse? I think so. We were talking about collaboration. I think Australian artists, again, traditionally haven't been the greatest collaborators externally, but I think we're getting a lot better at that, which is really good. I think there are opportunities then for artists outside of Australia, and the vast majority of you in this room, no doubt, work with artists not from Australia. But if you don't work with an Australian artist, let me take this opportunity to say, work with an Australian artist. They work very, very hard and are not afraid of flying very far. So that is a positive. And yeah, I think the nature of that collaboration, the nature of consumption as well. You know, we are a big market. Australia is a top 10 music market, so we have real music lovers in Australia, people who will consume, who will purchase merchandise, who will purchase tickets. But we are not immune to what the rest of the world is facing, which is like you have these massive tech companies that are driving what is popular, what people are consuming, these massive media organizations. We talk about the democratization, but really what's happening is the power is being consolidated into these platforms. You know, I'm a subscriber to the New York Times. I live in Sydney, and they can drive what is popular. And Australians are the same as people around the world, and they are consuming a lot of foreign media, foreign websites, and that is also driving what is popular in Australia. So I'm going on a bit, but there was if you're wondering if you work with a non-Australian artist, if you wonder if they could work in Australia, I did see a stat from Luminate, and I'll get the figures a little bit wrong, but they were comparing the top 10,000 stream songs in America to other countries. I think Australia had the most crossover with the US. Maybe Canada was slightly more, but Australia was way up there. So if you have an artist who is working in America, they're probably going to work in Australia as well.
I guess on that, and I agree that there is a risk of homogenization of content if, we're all being fed the same content. But have you noticed any micro trends happening or, in certain markets or genres coming through?
When you say micro trends, what do you?
Well, any type of music that comes through, we were talking about this earlier. We have a really big Asian population in Australia. There's a greater demand for for foreign language music now than there was, say, 10 years ago.
Yeah.
From what I'm seeing.
I think that just comes with the generation. Like, we're all sitting on this phone now. Everyone's kind of they're kind of becoming more privy to all these different countries, continents, cultures that have their own music, which is so awesome because, especially Australia, it's such a multicultural society. So finally, these different cultural groups in Australia have these artists that, are actually taking the leap and coming down to Australia, and I think the artists are quite surprised about how big the crowds are that they're pulling. But because, as I was saying, because we're so multicultural, I think there's pockets for everyone now, and with streaming and with content, there is something for everyone. There's so many sub-genres of genres now where, as I said, there is something for everyone. So I think those are the micro trends. I don't know how deep they're going to continue getting, but already you're kind of seeing it's just getting deeper and deeper, and I don't think it knows no bounds at this point.
Oh, totally. And I think back to my radio days, and obviously there's so much more music being created than there was a decade ago when I was in radio. But the things that I would get delivered. And I hosted the Australian Music Show, so I had the real privilege of kind of being at the forefront of what was being made. The diversity of sounds that is coming out of Australia now just blows that out of the water, which, as somebody who works from the point of view of exporting Australian music, is so exciting. And I think there's a real opportunity for Australian artists, and then in turn for artists from other countries coming into Australia, of Australian music being able to get a foothold in markets that we traditionally wouldn't have been able to, because we just didn't have the artists that necessarily those countries were really interested in. We get asked more and more from artist managers, how can I break into Asia? I'm putting that in inverted commas because, as we know, this is not a homogenized market, and there are many different countries and cultures and markets, and you have to have a really multifaceted strategy. Traditionally, Australians were very, very good at making 4-piece indie rock. That we did that very well. Tame Impala, Courtney Barnett, King Gizzard and the Lizard Wizard, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We still do it incredibly well. As some of the world leaders. Dance music now, Australians are absolutely smashing it. But like you were saying, this kind of the multicultural element of Australia, and you see artists who have such fascinating cultural backgrounds who are starting to make music. And I think there are real opportunities for artists, of whatever heritage, to kind of go back, for lack of a better phrase, or to go and play in countries where they have a cultural heritage. Yeah. Hopefully be able to find a fan base in a way that other Australian artists can't, but start to develop those collaborations, start to develop those relationships, and then bring them back to Australia. It's a very old school way of thinking, which is something I think has gotten a bit lost. In the 1990s, Australian punk bands used to do really well in Japan. So what they would do is they would go to Japan, they would find an act to tour with, who would be the headliner, but there would be a reciprocity. So they would say, we will tour with you in Japan, and we will take you back to Australia, and you tour with us. Now, obviously, the economies are not the same as it was in the 1990s, and everything is much more expensive, so that's a little bit harder. But I think that may be lost a little bit. I'd love to see that more, and I think Australian artists would be, Australian audiences would be so receptive to that. People come out and see support acts. It's great.
Well, how important do you think networks are today? Because that's a great example of establishing a really strong network with, a group of people in a scene.
I saw it during the COVID lockdowns. Like when we couldn't get out of the country. Try exporting when you can't get out of your home, let alone your country. There were companies who promised us that, virtual networking would be the future. But it's not, because it turns out that we are social creatures and we have to be in front of people. It's the way that it is. And that makes me really happy. So networks are 100%, they are so important. And when you grow up in Australia, you grow up feeling like you are so far away from everything, and so getting out there and traveling, 15 hours to the US, you do it. It's like you could wish the sky was another color, but it's not going to be. So you just get on that plane. I'm here with Esty Zilber from Sounds Australia, who, AKA, is my boss. And she was saying to reception, like when we got in last night, I had such a lovely flight, like it was only 8 hours. And he thought that she was having a joke, and it was like, no, like literally 8 hours to get to another country is a breeze for us. That is so lovely.
So true.
So, yes, networking is so important, and Australian artists and industry are more than happy to get on planes and get out there and do that, because you just have to, because we're in Australia.
I think it is also more important for Australians to do it, just because we are so far away from
totally
people.
Agree.
So, all my life, I just felt like I had to put in extra work than the people in the United States had to. So when I would hear people in the United States complaining about this, and that, I'm like, mate, just imagine being born 15, 16 hours away on the other side of the world. Like, social media has opened so much, it's like so much opportunity for Australians as well, just to get out and be able to do all that networking and talk to people that they would never have been able to talk to, 20 years ago. So, yeah, I think networking is so important, especially when you're quite far away from the rest of where everything goes down. So, yeah.
And that's certainly a challenge, not just for Australian artists, but everyone in this room would know, the way that we consume music now, like when you release a song, it's like we always say, it's like from your very first song, you are essentially exporting. So your audience becomes global, and it's hard to kind of build from like market to market to market, because you might have fans, you might have little pockets of fan bases exploding all over the world. And so then the desire or the need to kind of be in all of those markets all the time is really difficult, because you only have a finite amount of money and a finite amount of energy as well. So being able to then prioritize which markets you go to without kind of letting the fires like dwindle in another. It's like, okay, we're going to stoke these a bit more, but we have to come back and we have to do a little bit of this, and then we have to go over there. Like that's really tough.
Yeah, it's a bit of a balancing act.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
And I assume that's a huge part of your strategy, looking at, what demographics, what countries are really listening to your music, watching your videos.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before you decide to embark on a tour somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, you'd want to hope that people come to the shows. So.
And I think with that, just to touch on something, Australian audiences are really loyal. So if you come and invest in the market early on, you will be repaid. Like artists and this is a very disparate kind of group of artists, like Pink and Catfish and the Bottlemen and the Wombats.
Queens of the Stone Age.
Queens of the Stone Age. These are all acts that came quite early in their career. Mumford & Sons is another one. Mumford & Sons broke in Australia. They came quite early, and fans just keep coming back and back and back. So if you do come to the market early, and yes, I understand it can be very expensive to come to Australia. But yeah, if you dedicate that time, if you dedicate those resources, that can really pay dividends for you in the future.
Well, on that point, tour routing is still a popular, way to tour, and particularly, yes, it is still an 8-hour flight, but it is possible to route through various parts of Asia and Australia to maximise, the territory that you tour in and minimise costs-ish. Are you seeing much of that?
I think in terms of touring in Asia, for me, like, it hasn't been the biggest market or the market that I've focused on the most. But moving forward, like, I think just because I can see how, one, obviously, like, it's cost effective, but two, obviously, like, the markets are so open for people to come in and kind of infiltrate them, So I think it's moving forward for myself at least, like, Asia will be a big place for me to come, and like, my heritage is I'm part Chinese as well, so yeah, I'd love to get out here and do a lot more.
What's exciting is, and I can't believe I'm going to say the words exciting and government in the same sentence, so you've heard this here first and the last time. But what's really exciting from like our perspective is that there's never been more music on the table for contemporary music in Australia from the government. We have a federal arts minister who is a massive music fan. From the state that I live in, New South Wales, an actual minister for music, which is a very, very rare thing. And from a federal government perspective, Asia Pacific is a really strong focus for them in terms of trade. So we often get asked about what we are doing in Asia. And I say this because what that means is there is money on the table in Australia for Australian artists and Australian businesses to come to Asia. So the opportunities for all of you in the room to do business with Australian artists, and then hopefully through those networks have reciprocity and come back to Australia, that's really exciting. And again, I cannot believe I said the words exciting and government in the same sentence.
We won't tell anybody back home. Did anyone have any questions? We've only got a minute left. Oh, yes, up the front. This is for you, Will.
Off me.
Yeah, because we're number one, so I mean, to have kind of the money of like the French or the Norwegians, like that would be delightful.
And also, there's a very strong cultural protection element to the French system as well, where we don't really have a protection of Australian culture or music really set in stone at the moment with any quotas or anything. So there is that.
Yeah. Who's doing it well? Yeah, look. Yeah, I mean, the Norwegians definitely come to mind. I mean, the Swedish also do it very well. The fact that I think, there's 3 net exporters of music in 3 countries that are net exporters of music, meaning more of their music is consumed outside of their own country than inside, and that's the US, UK, and Sweden. So we definitely look at Australia definitely looks at someone like Sweden, like us, a country that has kind of a dream of also being a net exporter of music. You look at something like Sweden, look at a country like Sweden and the infrastructure they have, and I'm being slightly facetious. It's not only about music. There is about the kind of from kind of education all the way up until you kind of your ABBAs. Like to be a great exporter of music, you need to touch all of those points.
Thank you, Dom. Thank you, Will.
Thank you for having us.